thanks everyone for joining. Really it's great to have you here. And as sort of we mentioned, the topic for this will be sort of what are the challenges you face in implementing LLMs when in production, and along with how to overcome them, what are best practices to use. And with me, I'll let both of these gentlemen introduce themselves as well. But essentially, I have Rohit who's the founder of Portkey, which is an LLM ops app. It's a one-stop shop to control all of your LLM related stuff in production. They just closed a round of funding last year from Lightspeed and have very quickly become the go-to sort of app for anybody looking to use LLMs in production. We also have Arko Chatterjee. He's the founder of Xylem. It's a Y Combinator-backed startup that makes it super easy for you to fine-tune your LLM. Typically open source LLMs where you control the weights. I'm Anshul. I'm an executive director here at Calsoft. Calsoft is a AI services company. We help our enterprise customers adopt LLMs. So let's sort of cut right to the chase. Would love to understand from both of you how you started Portkey and Xylem respectively, and who your ideal customer segment is. Rohit, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that kind intro, Anshul, and glad to be here. So I started Portkey last year around March. Had been in the Gen AI space at Freshworks and then at Pepper Content. So had been fiddling around building products with GPT-2 for customer support, and then started with the private beta of GPT-3 all the way to 3.5 Turbo at Pepper, where we launched a product that was used by almost 500,000 people at one point in time. And I think through both these experiences, we realized that I was in love with this technology because AI truly felt like AI for the first time. And we can keep calling it stochastic parrot, next word prediction, whatever. But I think it is truly magical what we're able to achieve with what's possible through API calls. There's no training. And Arko will say there is definitely some training, but for most of the cases, you could just start with no training and just get going. And so that was awesome. But taking stuff to production was insane. It was insanely hard in terms of the tools that needed to be built, etc. And I think early last year, this switch sort of clicked in our minds that cloud adoption did not happen till the time DevOps did not offer a solid foundation for enterprises to adopt cloud. I think the same is true here. A lot of enterprises are in fear and doubt of how I can adopt Gen AI for my company best, knowing very well that I need to adopt this, and this is like imperative that we do something this year. So that's the reason we started Portkey. We're now, as you rightly mentioned, we're an LLM ops company. We want to propagate the AI gateway pattern on how can you deploy an AI gateway within your LLM architecture, which helps you take some of the operational issues away from your application. So you focus on building the best Gen AI app, and all the boring stuff of rate limiting, model management, observability, etc., can be taken care of by the AI gateway. So that's essentially how we started, and it's been a fun journey so far.
Yeah, so we actually use Portkey for some of our own internal enterprise applications at Calsoft, and we find it very helpful to switch between LLMs to be able to debug it, to be able to log various issues that come up. So yeah, really love the product. Orko, what about you? Your story with Xylem and how you serve customers and what you do?
So I mean, mine was probably in Jan of last year when we actually started Xylem. We were in the midst of closing our first startup after 2 years, and then we were like, what should we be doing? And then a problem that we kind of realized we could solve for is probably knowledge management, because we were running a remote company through the pandemic. We had scaled up to 50, 60 contractors, 10 full-time employees, and eventually we were like, okay, let's just do something around knowledge management with this new Gen AI thing. I think GPT 3.5 was capable enough to be able to create concise answers a lot more than we expected it to, because in our last startup we tried GPT-2, it wasn't at the scale at GPT-3 at which GPT 3.5 was at. And then we were like, okay, you don't really have much things around knowledge management that could probably give you a, now it's called answer engine, perplexity like things for internal data. And that's when we started building enterprise search. And very soon we had scaled to about 10 million tokens a day on our infra. And most of the things we were using were off-shelf APIs of multiple different providers like Pinecone. And like for search, we like for the LLM, we had GPT 3.5. And then we had about, I think, 12 to 15 active customers. And they were immediately like, can you just start self-hosting it? Because there were privacy concerns and a bunch of other things coming up with GPT. Some were like, this does not really understand my company's context. Can you just fine-tune the embedding and host my own embedding instead of your own, like a general OpenAI embedding? Or like, can you just change the model to something that's more contextual to me? I'm happy to go ahead and maybe pay for it and all of that. So people were willing to pay, but the problem was the infra layer to allow them to maybe keep swapping the fine tunes or keep making sure that the embeddings are changing, and then like making sure those are scaling with the whole product is where we saw the bottleneck. And we felt like most application layer companies that are going and selling to businesses will eventually start moving to more customized workflows, more like moving from generalized AI to more of specialized or more complex AI workflows on the back end. And there was not really any, like there was no solution like a Vercel or a Heroku that would allow them to like quickly deploy and scale those things on the back end, because the DevOps was just so complex and there's barely many engineers who understand at core how transformers work on top of GPUs. And that's where we are like, let's just build this infra out, because we were anyway trying to build it for ourselves. And these were two different businesses. And that's when we decided to pivot at the end of September. And we are now at a place where we are probably going to be uh, like we're going to be launching our self-serve stack, where you can just bring your data, fine-tune your own models, deploy them in production in a single click, and not having to worry about reserving GPUs or any of that. You can just pretty much get your inference APIs and scale on top of that. Of course, there will be some rate limits on a certain like and cold starts because it's serverless, but as negligible as possible. And pretty much once you have scaled, you can get dedicated deployments with us. And all APIs work with LangChain, Llama Index, they're OpenAI SDK compatible. So you can pretty much connect it in any RAG application. And then you can connect it back to observability tools that are out there in the market for you to register your logs, and then feed that data back into training it again, and keep making your model better and scaling on it, and manage multiple models, multiple fine tunes, multiple data sets on the back end. Don't not worry about the DevOps, MLOps, and scaling pipelines around it, the CI/CD around it. So that's what we kind of abstract out. It's pretty much like bringing your website or web app, deploying it on Vercel, and getting your web app up and running. We are pretty much positioning ourselves like a Vercel for GenAI backend. Long-term goal is your vector DBs, embeddings, all kinds of models, and even the app in itself. Everything can be deployed with us and can be scaled. And you get APIs to run all of them in production in any customer, in any customer's environment, your own environment. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed this in the past as well, I think, because we've had a partnership, but the idea of having an enterprise co-pilot that's trained on your data, and I think it's important for a lot of enterprises to own the model weights, especially from a IP perspective. I think that is what we see resonating again and again, going to the sales and marketing department, saying we'll have a co-pilot that can answer any questions related to your sales data. That is a very, very powerful concept. So let's cut straight to the chase. I mean, I'd love to understand from you guys, what are some of the most significant technical challenges that you're seeing in terms of deploying LLMs in production, ideally in enterprises? And what are some of the best practices to overcome these challenges? We work with a couple of Fortune 500 companies as well, but would love to first understand from either one of you on this particular case, like, because we have a lot of people in the audience over here that are semi-technical, if not full-fledged developers, but we are all trying to wrap our head around the fact that how do you actually use LLMs in production? Because everyone's talking about, oh yeah, it'll like increase productivity, etc. But very few enterprises seem to be reaching that production stage. So open it up to you guys for this.
I think most of them are not deploying LLMs in production yet. Most of them are still sticking to third-party APIs of GPT to just start off with,
Yeah.
or Anthropic's Claude. But I think how to deploy an app end-to-end in production is what Rohit can probably give more insights on. Then I can go a bit more like heavily on how can you deploy these models in production and why you should not ideally try to, because you'll spend a year doing it and then you can just take off the shelf stacks. But yeah, I think Rohit can talk about how you can do the journey for deploying and scaling your products. And then how do you shift your own models? How do you shift your own stack? I think I can take that up.
Yeah. I think we can also spend a lot of time, Arko, just talking about LLMs in production and what does it really mean? Because I'm sure there are
Okay, so what does it? Okay, so what does it really mean?
I think generally people just say LLMs in production to say, okay, I've deployed. What they really want to say is an LLM application in production.
Okay.
But if you really look at it, LLM means large language model in production. Means, am I deploying my own large language model in production? Most likely not.
No, you're using an API.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where there are a lot of different terms that get conflated. But yeah, probably this is just not the right time. Otherwise, we'll spend 45 minutes.
But actually, that's a really good point. I mean, Arko, if you want to sort of deploy your own LLM production, you'd go to Xylem. If you want to use an API endpoint, you'd probably end up using something like Portkey. So which one should you use and why? I guess that's something that's to build essentially a Gen AI application.
Yeah, that also, and there's, I think, another layer, which is the framework layer. So you have the framework that you use to build an application that is like a LangChain or a Haystack or a Llama Index, Crew AI, etc. Then you have the API management layer or the ops layer, which is something like Portkey, or you're using your own API gateway or whatever. And then you have the inference layer beneath it, which is actually running these models. And I'm sure there's one more layer Arko can talk about more, is creating these LLMs from scratch on privately trained data instead of fine-tuning models as well. So in my head, I would think of those as the 4 different layers of sort of LLMs in production. Yeah.
I think as Rohit rightly mentioned, like we ideally sit on the training and the inferencing layer. That's where we sit. And I mean, most people are not pre-training. If they are, we kind of tell them that don't, specifically because they just don't have enough data to pre-train a model properly and actually have significant results. And after a point, it's also like you achieve a kind of accuracy on fine-tuning that does not really have that sudden exponential change if you move to pre-training. So it's just the cost to performance ratio just doesn't make sense to those, like in those most of these use cases. As initially also you mentioned, Anshul, I think most people or enterprise, not just enterprises, we believe that most of the startups will also be looking for open source or alternatives or their own models. And it's not really around the security anymore. Most people thought that it's around GPT not being private and all of that. Honestly, nobody really is thinking about the security part of it. The 4 major concerns that we are coming across is the IP ownership. That has become pretty critical for a bunch of these AI startups for whom it's core. So I think some of the coming back to the PC, like the point of where we were, like what we see on how people are going to production with LLMs. I think the first piece is experimenting with GPT and Anthropic or any of these closed source models. Once you have scaled your use case, I think what Rohit was mentioning of LLMs in production, it's more like LLM apps in production, and is the app actually deriving you positive ROI on your whatever you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
And figuring out nuances on where it's scaling, where it's not scaling. And then again, once you've scaled up, is the accuracy the problem? Is the performance the problem? Latency the problem? Or is the IP ownership of these models for a client becoming the problem? And then you use a platform like ours.
Mhm.
And then you take those APIs and then connect it back to the observability layer and the ops layer, where you then keep, it's more like measure and improve kind of a piece. And most people haven't even gone through one proper cycle of this. That's what we have realized. And then there is this whole debate online of RAG versus fine tuning. And we are always like, why do you need to like have a debate? Like it's more like long-term memory or reasoning and short-term memory and reasoning, where you if you give like medical research papers to like a 12th grad, they'll most definitely not really be able to understand what's happening over there.
Yeah.
But if you give it to a general physician or maybe a medical researcher, they'll understand it. So training a model is creating that reasoning that the person has, but you can't keep updated with all the research in your head. You have to keep searching somewhere. So that's what brings in with your search. So I think bunch of these concepts are also very, very nuanced. People think either or, it's more like both.
Both. Yeah.
And then there are multiple layers. Like you might just not need the best model in the world for all your use cases. It's a 2 trillion parameter model. Maybe you can use a smaller, lighter model, because a Llama 3 or a Mistral, all of these models have good enough accuracy for most generalized use cases. And most people are using LLMs for fairly generalized use cases. So that's where I think they also mistake where a bunch of these things fit. They have this whole notion that open source models are bad, or it's RAG versus fine tuning. But the thing is, you can actually,
It's not a binary thing.
yeah, it's not really binary. And I think it's just a nature of these tech shifts. You want to pick sides, get your tribe, and a bunch of these things. It's beyond like tech, I think.
Yeah. No, but so to go back to something you said, which is that very few people, if anybody, has seen the full cycle of going through everything you explained, and then actually sort of coming up with a fully tested evals, the output, the whole sort of 9 yards. Have you guys come across any customer or anybody of that sort who has actually done that? And can you speak more about how did they actually define, like, what is the process that they went through? And how do they identify the use case? How do they decide what LLM to use, if at all? LLM, like you said, fine-tuning an LLM was just using an API endpoint, all of that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
we have
think Rohit
seen,
can talk about that.
yeah,
Sorry.
so we've actually seen multiple.
Yeah.
I would still say, when I say a lot, because I'm directly in the line of action when people are going to production. So I've seen a lot of use cases.
Yeah.
But then when I step out of my domain,
Yeah.
I'm sure that percentage is very, very tiny. And people are still trying to figure out what are the best use cases that will work for me. But say, for example, having worked with Postman,
Yeah.
I've seen them adopt GenAI like crazy over the last 7, 8 years. And even for a company that's like investing in GenAI really heavily, they took a good 6, 7 months to really go to production with their Copilot for Postman. There's a lot of learnings from that journey, but I would say the top things in my mind are: one, they did a lot of iteration. And iteration was possible because they had visibility over everything that's happening within their process. So they would identify a lot of use cases, run POCs on these use cases, and quickly find out what are areas which should be higher ROI for you. And I think that's also areas where a lot of enterprises today are, where they're running these POCs and trying to find where the real ROI would be. I think running more of these
For
experiments in parallel.
internal facing, or for their external, like, was this for internal enterprise applications, or was this as a feature of Postman in the product?
So for Postman, it was a little bit of both, but their primary use case was as a feature in their product.
I see.
They were also doing a lot of internal applications that they were testing and using as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was both.
Got it.
Yes. Yeah. So first was iteration. So how do you build visibility into everything that's happening? Quickly iterate with different models, with different prompts, different architectures. And I think the other big learning I've had from them is they did not go out there and just say, oh, we'll slap a chatbot on our application. That rarely works. You have to figure out, okay, where is my moat? What are my problems? And what's unique data that I have that my customers can then use in this copilot that I have? So like a very good example I see is a lot of times if you're using Postman, a request will fail and they show an error saying this is the error. Now in their copilot, you can say, tell me why. And that
Yeah.
copilot will come up and it'll say, this is what you can do to fix it. Do you want me to fix it? You say yes, and it'll go fix your API. Now that's a very connected application. And I think
Yeah.
these applications take time to build. So I think but I've seen a lot of use cases in BFSI. I think finance is adopting GenAI like crazy. I'm surprised insurance companies are moving so fast. A lot of SaaS companies, obviously,
Yeah.
deploying healthcare, seen a lot of companies. So I think big tech is obviously ahead, but this
Yeah.
time the companies that were known to be laggards are also not staying behind. They're like, oh, we've got to experiment and we'll deploy in production fast.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So for example, like I don't know if you've ever used Hex, but they have this super great feature where if your SQL query fails for whatever reason, they have this thing called fix with magic that just automatically autocorrects the thing. It's literally magic. It's amazing. And you're right, it's the basic low-hanging fruit is just let's just put a chatbot. And I don't know. I mean, you sometimes wonder if ChatGPT had not come out as a chatbot, and if it had come out as something else, do you think the UI of interacting with an LLM would be something completely different? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more nuanced, like the way Hex and Postman are coming out with features for sure.
Agreed.
Um,
Yes. I mean,
or
the chat UI has almost become normalized because it's very easy to imagine like chatting with AI. And we've always thought of this with the chatbot interface, etc. But I
yeah,
think more integrated interfaces are definitely what will win. And I think that's also where you'll need a lot more fine-tuning, more deeper RAG, more agentic flows. And that's where you need to also understand your audience a little bit better and then define that architecture that will work for you. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if you've seen
Well,
this recently, but the Indigo website has they have a chatbot. It's a Gen AI powered chatbot, but they have a very well-defined agentic structure where you can go in, you can book a flight all in that little chat box. They offer you 15% off if you actually book it to the chat box. I guess they want to get more data and get more users sort of using that chat box. But I found that pretty interesting at Indigo scale where they've adopted an agentic workflow. So
Nice. And nobody's tried to break it yet.
not yet, not yet. Yeah, I tried sort of using it as a chat GPT, but no, I guess nobody's tried to break it yet. Yeah.
Very cool.
What are you seeing?
I was just saying around what I think Rohit also mentioned, that it has to go a bit more nuanced. For example, a lot of people go after the coding use cases. We've seen multiple startups around that have been going after it. We've spoken to potential customers as well who are like, we're trying to do something around like a coding copilot, but we are like GitHub Copilot exists.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like why, like how do you take it beyond that? And I think what's where we have seen most of the adoption for most like companies or GenAI applications or any kind of GenAI implementation is probably in more nuanced areas. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a, a company that's literally just allowing you to figure out which is the best open source uh, um, like repo that you want to use for any of your applications by pretty much using LLMs to pick that repo, run it virtually somewhere, go through the code, figure out what errors you'll run through, and then bringing that back instead of you spending hours deploying it, figuring out the errors and all of that.
Yeah,
That's way more nuanced than a coding copilot.
yeah.
That's very, very specific to people who constantly pick open source stuff and try to run them on their own. And I think that's where figuring out, as Rohit also mentioned, figuring out who your audience is, what's your use case. I'm going more like doing more nuanced Gen AI pipelining around RAG, fine-tuning your models to give them more context and reasoning actually comes in. And I think most people are just not there. Like they're just scratching the surface. Like at large, if I take the entire market, of course you have a lot of forward-moving companies. They are very close to being there or are already there and are in the next second cycle, third cycle of doing these iterations. I think the second thing that Rohit mentioned of iterating a lot is where the next nuance comes in. Like even for training, you can't just train a model once and just be like, okay, this is gonna work. Like you have to fine tune multiple times. You have to collect enough data. A huge part of this, what people miss out is the data.
Yeah.
Like initially when we were working with people, they were like, they would ask us to like, they would use our stack and then they would go ahead and deploy these, like get the benchmarks out of these models. And they would be like, the model did not really behave better. And then they would think it's our fault somehow. And then we go back to them and we're like, your data had,
But also,
like your data was,
what is the definition of better? Like I think that the whole eval thing is
yeah,
something.
that's
Yeah.
something I'm coming to. Like another thing that I'm coming to. So when we looked into it, we figured that they literally got their training data set and the evaluation data set from a core data corpus, and there was like about 30% contamination that happened between both of them. So the benchmarks were really good, but in production, the model wasn't really that great, and it was a data issue. And then that's where like I think a lot of people miss out on these, like the core nuances of how do you go about doing certain ML workloads is also changing. I think that is also because the definition of an AI and ML engineer is also changing somehow.
Yeah.
Like when we speak to people and they're like, we have hired AI and ML engineers. Most of them are actually software engineers who have started working on Gen AI, have adopted a lot of these ops tools, inference and training tools, and taking it from there. So a lot of the core understanding of machine learning is not yet there.
Yeah.
Which is really great that more and more developers can now train their models, work on the core ML stack. But then I think that whole initial data science concepts are where some of these people are faltering out. I think that's something that eventually or gradually, as the market evolves, most of them also will acquire. Uh, I feel bad for the ML engineers, but like it's also great that
Yeah,
there are
it's
30
more
so many more
democratized.
engineers building those.
And I guess companies like yours, like Xylem and Portkey, I mean, that's what you're doing. You're you're enabling traditional software developers to be able to use LLMs and become AI engineers, right? You're creating a level of abstraction above so that everyone can sort of, here's LLM for everyone, essentially, or some sort of case for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time we've seen it's the software engineers who are
Yeah,
so enthusiastically adopting AI. Otherwise, AI was always this, I have to do courses and I have to do a
dark
lot of
science.
learning
Yeah.
before. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I think it's become a lot more accessible for sure.
Yeah. I think part of it also is that I was at Replit and I think amongst people that use Replit, we found a lot of designers and product managers who started using Replit because it became super easy for them to code, obviously with AI assisted coding, but also hosting and deploying from one stop shop solution. I think you see a lot more like product managers, for example. If I want to quickly prototype an app today, I can do it. I can, which was pretty difficult 3 4 years ago, unless you were a proper developer or engineer.
Yeah.
Because of that, now PMs can sort of push on their engineering team to go out and, hey, okay, this is the feature I want to develop that's AI enabled. Can we go ahead and do it? Sort of mock it up and push that forward. I think that is also sort of pushing this trend more.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and also the fact that Replit has this nice tab feature. So, I mean, you can just tab, and it's written for you. I think
Yeah.
that makes things super easy. I mean, I was surprised. We got some interns at Portkey for the first time, and these interns did not know how to code.
Oh wow.
But then
Okay.
almost everybody was like, yeah, I mean, I'll just spin up a Python notebook and ChatGPT is going to write the code any which way. So it's become
Yeah,
that.
but the bottleneck is now moving to QA. Like in the software development life cycle, it's like Okay, before it was just coming up, putting pen to paper and writing out those first 100 lines of code. Now everything is moving to the QA part where it that I think that's the new bottleneck essentially.
Yeah, because I think POC is super easy. And
Yeah.
back to production, right? It's so you can create a POC really easily and impress people, which is
Yeah.
where it is all about demos. But in enterprises, that's the reverse. They're like, okay, the demo is cool. Now, what do I do with it? How do I
Yeah.
take it to production and prove ROI? That's where I think it takes a lot more metal and a lot more time and frustration as well.
Yeah. But so in terms of sales motion, what we are seeing is a lot of our clients tend to be sort of bigger and like more of the legacy sort of tech companies essentially. But managers, so I mean, in the last 1.5 years, managers have had budgets flat, they've not really increased. When it comes to AI POCs, people can find budget, but in order to get budget, you need to come up with a POC, take it to your upper management to get that budget to move forward from there. That's why you're seeing so many different POCs. Um, I do think towards the end of this year's when you start seeing more things actually being adopted, and I'm not talking about cutting edge technology companies like Postman or like any of the cutting edge. I'm talking about more of the legacy companies. I think that's what you'll see towards the end of this year.
Yeah.
Question for you, Arko. Why would anyone want to fine-tune an open source model? Like, what is the use case? Like, what is the killer use case that you tell customers that, okay, this is why you should fine-tune it versus just using RAG?
I think like four major reasons that we have come across till date of why. We get bunch of queries because of which we were like, let's just open up a wait list and
Yeah.
we'll start doing slow release of people. The probably the topmost use case of why people are coming to us is first is IP and ownership of these models. They're like, and most of them are like AI companies, SaaS companies, or
Yeah.
large enterprise data and ML teams. They're like, it's all our data. Some for some co-pilot companies and agent companies, they're like, I have scaled up. I'm closer to maybe a Series A, and
Yeah.
my code still runs on GPT, and that's kind of just not ideal in the long term for them. And I think that's where a lot of people come in from, that it's all their own data. They have more nuanced insights of what their users want. And I think the second pointer is verticalization based on this itself. Like verticalizing these models, you don't really need a large model. You can have like smaller models running in parallel on the back end that can pretty much be route. You can route them to based on what the request is, what the use case is, and break your one large 2 trillion parameter or 1.8 trillion parameter GPT-4 into like smaller 5, 6 use case specific models, and verticalize them. A lot of healthcare, finance, legal, a lot of these
When you
AI.
say, I'm just going to push you on that. When you say verticalize, you mean the terminology being able to use industry specific words or terminology, like for example, in healthcare claims or having specific medical codes, like having that syntax in the output is something that's important. That's what you mean by verticalization, or no?
Those I think a lot more also around improving the reasoning for that specific use case is also where this comes in from.
Okay.
For example, you might be a company that's going ahead and doing let's pick up that same coding co-pilots, that whole gamut of coding co-pilots that are out there in the market, and let's like pick one of those up. Somebody is specifically helping you do maybe figure out like do proxies for jailbreaks. So you need that model to actually understand to the last point what jailbreaking is, what are some of these jailbreaking examples, and feed that kind of prompt and answer pairs to make sure the model has that reasoning to be able to know this. And the other issue that we have seen is that when these models are much larger, like GPT-4 and others, like you can fine tune them. Ownership and all is already a problem. You can't really own a GPT of your own. But the second thing that we have seen is because they're so large, no matter how much data you feed into it, you can't just steer them away from their generalized behavior
Yeah.
in general. So like having a smaller model and feeding like 5,000, 10,000 data points can actually help you steer the behavior a lot more. I think that's what I'm talking about when it comes to verticalization. And then domain specificity, internal language, all of that is surely a part of it. But a lot of people are looking at this on their roadmap as well from a reasoning point of view and accuracy point of view. And a lot of the things around terms can actually be fixed on the embedding layer itself. You don't really need to come to the model all the time. Where your maybe your RAG is failing because of your uh, search and not your model. And that's where you can maybe fine tune these embeddings further on and build on top of open source embeddings and then take it to and then feed that context into a model. So a lot of queries that are coming for us are also around embedding fine tuning because they're like, can we fine tune the embedding because it's not even able to find the right context. Then it has to give it to the model. So I think that's where the second nuance comes. And then the third issue is latencies. It's just like most use cases don't really require the heavy reasoning of something as large as GPT. So they're like a Llama 370B hosted APIs, like third-party APIs of that also works. Anything that is smaller and has good enough reasoning is also fine. And most of these open source models have good enough reasoning today for most generalized use cases. We are already using RAG. So a lot of the contextual part is also heavy lifting is done using the vector DBs. So like for the model, you're actually paying 50 times more for higher latencies for most generalized use cases. And that's where we are seeing a lot of the shift towards open source models that people are looking at. And that's the and because the barrier to entry was so high of self-hosting and all of that, we've now like pretty much built our stack in a serverless manner. So you can just deploy your fine tunes and get APIs out of these models, just like you would use a GPT's API, and you pay per token, just like you would pay for GPT as well. So your barrier to entry is actually like your is way lower to move to an open source model. And then from there you keep observing, measuring, just like Rohit was mentioning, and then keep scaling on that. That's how most of our customers and all the conversations that we have been having are around.
And these are private instances that
Not all of them. Not all of them. Like we are going. What we are seeing is private instance is not really the biggest concern there. Like if you're like like for enterprises, yes, but for most other companies, they're like, even if it's a shared instance and I get the API for at lower latencies and lower costs, I'm fine with that to start scaling. I think private instances will come in when they actually have scaled up on that use case and they're like at scale. Private instances are very, very useful when you have high scale and you'd want the model to be up and running 24/7. You want zero cold starts. You want no shared in like you want to dedicate that compute because you can predict your scale. Or you're a large enterprise and you're like, I want dedicated
you
deployments
have the
of my.
budgets to get a private instance
Yeah.
essentially.
That's largely how we would place it.
Yeah. I'm guessing, but it's also most larger companies are the ones that would want to go through the effort of fine tuning and therefore would require some sort of private instance, right? Is that what you're
I
seeing?
have seen more smaller companies have to do like I've seen more smaller companies that are doing fine tuning. I think most AI co-pilot companies and AI companies, they are the ones probably first to adopt fine tuning, as far as I've seen.
Okay. Got it.
Because they have the queries, they have the requests, they have the data to
And they have
know.
the technical
Yeah.
knowledge as well.
Yeah, and they understand the differences between embeddings, models, and I think that has not like permeated downstream to all companies yet. But I think as more and more platforms come out, like Portkey, like Xylem, who are allowing people to be able to look at different options, I think that will slowly permeate the experimentation because the cost of experimentation and the barrier to experimentation is high. Is
Yeah.
how I would place it.
Yeah. Even actually, I would 100% agree to that. People want to fine tune, but it's very hard for them to quantify if the fine tuning helped me or not. Like I will, like for the first half of this year, I was telling people that, oh, we all think fine tuning is hard, but if you find a platform like Xylem, or even if you use APIs, it's like literally maybe $10-20 to fine tune a small model. It's not a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time, and your data sets aren't too hard to create. Even then, I think in production, the biggest learning I've had is that people will fine tune. They might even see value, but then they're like, oh, am I capturing the right metrics for this fine tuned model that I created or not? Or when the next better model or the next most hyped model comes out, how do I compare this to my already awesome fine tune? Do I move or do I not move? So it's all of these things which cause problems. So it's almost like in the maturity cycle, you have to go through an application in production, high accuracy, and then you choose fine tuning because you already have a lot of the other observability, evaluation, gateway type of stuff set up. And then you can really dive in and go to fine tuning. But I'm sure, Arko, you're seeing a lot more very serious companies that have deployed models are in production, and they're the ones who are actually going to keep fine tuning in production to get that last bit of juice in the very end.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we would place it. Like we are betting big on um like everybody having their own model and there not being like a single large model in the world that people are using APIs on. I think
Yeah.
when we also got into YC, our group partner like Dalton, he was also like, if I was 23, I would just build infra for open source because people are not seeing it now. In like 2 years, you'll just be able to see that everybody is like, I have my own model. Having an LLM is what like how we would describe ourselves is probably we are the company that's trying to democratize having an LLM because most people are not able to have an LLM. I think that's where the experimentation, the early adopters curve, all of that is coming in when most people are still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like one of the core things that you need for going into this that most people don't have is a good eval data set.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that people forget until they have fine-tuned the model and they're like, oh, we need to create an eval data set. And then they go back and try to create the right eval data sets for themselves. Or while the training is going on, they're like 10% evals. So they a lot of these things are happening on the fly as you're facing it. So I think that core step-by-step process hasn't been established for most companies yet. I think that's once that happens, the cycle of iteration will be much faster on all of these applications. So you'll just train, deploy, get the API, connect an observability tool or a gateway or an ops stack like Portkey, and then again loop that back into the training stack, get the APIs, again do that, and keep just pushing it further. And in that, you'll also find maybe a single use case can be broken into 3 more use cases, and the cost to fine tune and deploy will be so lower that you'll probably be like, okay, let's just do 3 more models instead of a single model. And you'll have these multiple smaller specialized models running together through APIs and through gateways to be able to connect it to your application. That's how we see.
Got it. I think we are almost close to time, so let's open it up to the audience for Q&A. For people in the audience, if you want to type in if you have any questions into the chat, Vaibhav can collect it and ask it.
There are 3 out.
Yeah, there are already 3. I can see that. Think starting with the last one first. Sanjay asks, can you speak about AI agents and the architecture associated with this? I am thinking of architectures like True AI. When can we see more of these come to GA in the market? And we are working with lines of businesses across verticals that want automation of tasks that I think this architecture can help. The goal is not to just automate one task, but try to automate an entire line of business. Do you guys see this happening in the next 6 to 9 months?
I think Rohit can take that one.
Yeah, and maybe I'll take a stab at it, right? So very honestly, agents or agentic workflows, there are a lot of frameworks and a lot of companies want to solve this problem because this is like a really important problem to solve. I also feel that we've not even achieved the full potential of any of the models that are out there, and agents try to exploit all of the best stuff that an LLM gives us. So agents are awesome. There are a lot of agentic frameworks that are building to solve this problem. Is it in production today? I don't think so. There are a lot of companies that are claiming that, oh, we have an agentic flow in production. But what they're confusing it to is an orchestration, which is step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is my agent, or I'm making calls out. And then, so there's nobody doing autonomous agents like Crew AI or AutoGen in production. But the first flavors of agents in production are co-pilots and chatbots, which can autonomously decide to make API calls out, get data, and then continue the conversation. So I think that's what is in production, but otherwise, no. Can AI end-to-end automate a business task in the next 6 to 9 months? You'll find me the most optimistic on AI, and I'm pushing stuff very hard, but I don't think 6 to 9 months, except for like extremely simple tasks, like say web scraping
Yeah, that's
or
exactly.
data
I
entry.
literally going to
Yeah,
say that because we're working on that for a customer right now.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I mean, web scraping, this 6 to 9 months, definitely. Those jobs definitely going away.
Yeah.
But if you want to do anything more complex, you'll need a human in the loop right now to just nudge the agent, which is still great because you'll achieve these 90% productivity improvements, which is awesome. So I think that's what we'll see in the next 6 to 9 months. But we never know when GPT-5 drops and we are all out of a job.
You think with GPT-5, you don't require an agent because you don't require somebody to, it's not a multi-step process, essentially.
That's what it's claiming, that you don't need planning anymore because the LLM will incorporate planning within itself. But I mean, all of these are rumors, right? So
Yeah, of course. I think another sort of use case for agents, especially right now, I mean, some like right of, I think the planning piece is something that we need to figure out. I think there's a lot of hype around agents. The first you saw last year with like Baby AGI and all of those like came out in March, April, and like it was super cool. And then there's a bit of a lull, and again, last 3, 4 months it's taken off. I played around with Crew AI, and I didn't particularly think it was something I would ever use for an actual application or use case. I mean, it's a super fun toy, but I don't think it's at the level I would use it today. I don't know. I don't know if you guys have used AutoGen. I've not used AutoGen for that matter.
yeah.
Um,
And we've used it at Portkey. So in
yeah.
fact, we are coming out with a large blog post on agentic frameworks, what works, what doesn't work, what's the difference between all of them. Because of the last 3 months, we've integrated with Crew AI, AutoGen, Phi Control Plane, so many of these agentic frameworks. So, but I would say AutoGen is probably the one that's used the most right now. But Crew AI is fun, and you exactly put it, right? It's something you love to play with.
Yeah.
Because you can very quickly build stuff, and yeah. So that's what it's in that prototyping phase where probably chatbots were or co-pilots were back in March last year.
Yeah. I think Arko, there's a question for you. How is, I guess, Xylem different from Vertex AI?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is like we have better performance benchmarks for sure. Like I think we'll be releasing our latest benchmarks. Finally, a lot of people have been asking when are you releasing the benchmarks. So I think we will be releasing them. We are at par with what a Fireworks AI is doing on their inference stack for their LLMs. Um, all our like for our APIs, and I think that should be live in production. That inference stack should be live in the next 6 months, or at the end of the year. I think that should be live for us. So performance is way more, so we can, which basically means that if you are hitting certain scale, you can hit that scale with all those latencies and that kind of performance 3 to 5 times cheaper, faster, but with us. So your cloud costs would be much lower on dedicated. Secondly, you don't really need to dedicate things like a Vertex AI or a Bedrock. We spoke to a bunch of these companies who are like, we woke up and then AWS has slapped us a $190,000 monthly bill suddenly because we were out of, like, suddenly it scaled up overnight and our GPUs were scaled up like horizontally, and they only offer dedicated. So because of that, GPU costs went up, shot up. And I think for us, keeping it serverless allows you to minimize a lot of these things. and you probably don't really need to worry about those dedicated pieces. And once you go dedicated, of course, we have like our inference stack deployed on like much lower compute reservation cost, which allows you to hit maybe 10 to which gives you a 10 to 12x benefit over a Vertex AI or a AWS. So instead of reserving GPUs for $3,500, you can do that for way lower with us. And secondly, instead of using that Vertex AI inference stack, you can have way more specialized inference stacks like ours or anyone else's that's in the inference space. And that allows you to squeeze the most out of your GPUs. And I think lower cost of compute plus a more efficient inference stack is like 10 to 15x of the on ROI compared to what a Vertex AI does. Most of the companies that we've spoken to, they're already like, we don't want to go for big three. They just have a like it's like Elastic versus OpenSearch, uh, Azure Data Lake versus Databricks. It's more like specialized versus generalized, I would say. We'll always be better than a Vertex AI and a Bedrock, and I think that's how we place ourselves, and we are going beyond that as well. We're going a way more like way deeper into allowing people to be able to like run multiple models, embeddings, and we want to go down the Vercel route of GenAI where you can host your application and be like a virtual cloud provider in a way, but for all your GenAI workloads. I think that's how we are looking at ourselves going ahead. Can we? It's more like, can we reduce the cost of ownership of all of these workloads and democratize them for everybody at the end of the day to be able to build on it, use it. It's like today, if you ask a ML engineer, what would you do for image processing? They would just be like, okay, I'll train something on OpenCV, deploy the application using Heroku, Red Hat. We have all of these things. For Gen AI, they'll be like, I'll use GPT's API. And I think we are at that phase where that whole transition needs to happen before people are able to. It'll be so easy that a third-party API will just be like an overkill. That's how we are trying to look at it.
I remember discussing this with you earlier in the year, but like putting Vertex AI aside with company when you're looking at sort of benchmarks against companies like Anyscale and Fireworks, if you sort of plot
We blow any scale out of the park.
sorry?
We blow any scale out of the park. I have no
I
clue
know, so I was
what's
gonna say, you look at the metric of funding raised to inference speed, you guys would probably, I mean, let's take the inverse of that because it's better. If you look at sort of inference speed to funding raised, you guys would blow that out of the park, that metric. Yeah.
That's the plan. I think we'll release that. We'll release it on Hacker News and LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere. That the numbers that we're achieving, and we pretty much want to go head on into this because we have figured out a way to make serverless scalable, profitable for most people, and I think companies like ourselves are the ones who can actually be able to do it profitably.
Yeah.
But on serverless, because we have that, we get multiple people running it, and then from there we can of course move to dedicated and allow you to like reserve your own compute reserve per hour and take it from there. And of course on-prem is there, but we are mostly going to be looking at on-prem on the long term because most people are not reserving compute. They don't have bare metal GPUs either, so on-prem is probably not there in the market as such, apart barring a few.
Yeah. Got it.
But also when you go live with that performance metric, you got to put up Anshul's graph, yeah. Performance per million raised.
That's what I told him in his pitch deck. That's definitely something that you should put.
Yeah, I will that. I mean, heading to demo day, that's a graph that we wanna work on. Like raise this much, these are the benchmarks. I think Fireworks raised 52 million and they announced it yesterday. So I think that's where, like, if we are at par with their performance, we will just put that out.
All right. Last question. So I think Harshaj asked, I'm working on an AI application. I'm fine-tuning, but I need some sort of tool that can show my prompt history and the results so that we can iterate over time. Can you please suggest something?
He's sitting here.
Hi, Rohit. I founded this company called Portkey.ai. You should check it out. But essentially, we do, I mean, logs, prompt management, prompt versioning. You should try it out. It's free up till 10,000 requests a month. So if you're building an AI application, just use it for free.
Yeah, I think the free version is up to 3 days of logs, if I'm not mistaken.
3 days of log retention.
Yeah.
And 10,000 requests a month.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, it works super great for basic applications, so highly recommend it. And then you can always get a paid version if you decide to go to the next level. Great. I think we're at time. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us. I think there were a couple of drop-offs, but really appreciate you guys taking the time out. I think somebody from the team has put in Rohit and Arko's emails in the chat. If you want to reach out to them to use Portkey or Xylem, you can also just go to the websites and I'm sure there's an option to book a sales call over there. So thanks a lot for taking the time. This has been recorded, so we will release the recording. And again, Rohit, Arko, really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedules as well to join us.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting us, Anshul. Thanks a lot. Hope it was beneficial to everyone here. And yeah, like we have the meeting links on both our websites. I think
especially for the folks who are joining in on a Friday evening in India. I think that is super.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Thanks for doing that.
That's true.
All right.
See
All
you.
right. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.